Hi, everyone. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about giving feedback to your peers in English 1001. So the document I have open is the instructions for peer reviews. If you wanted to follow along with me, you can find it in the unit overview document, or you can also find it linked from our current learning module. So I'm going to skip over all the first part about rough drafts, word count requirements, and finding your chat partners, because that's not really what I'm worried about today. Instead, what I wanted to talk about is ways to provide effective feedback to your classmates. So I noticed in the first round of feedback from the personal statement assignment, most of the feedback that was given, I would say most of it that was given, was simply flattery to the partner. So it was things like, you did a great job. I really enjoyed your writing. Thank you for sharing. Now, those are all very kind and nice things to say to our partners, but unfortunately, they are not helpful in the sense that they don't give the person anything to work with for improving their writing. And I know that presenting feedback to someone on their writing can feel really daunting. When I was a student, I didn't like doing it because I was always thinking to myself, sort of like, well, who am I to be providing feedback on writing? I'm not an expert, I'm a student. So why am I the person here to provide feedback? So I'm hoping in this short video, I can share with you some ideas and techniques. Number one, to make you more comfortable giving feedback. And number two, some specific ideas for providing helpful feedback to your partners this semester. So I'm looking at the peer review discussion guidelines for all students here. And I just wanted to talk about the guidelines that you can use to help craft some effective feedback. So the first is to be mindful of your tone while you're responding to your peers' writing. So yes, it's a good idea to open with a nicety, with saying something pleasant about their writing, and to do that, here and there throughout. And we are aiming to achieve a tone that is both friendly and supportive, okay? However, if the only thing your response contains is niceties, that's not helpful, right? That doesn't give you anything to work with as the writer. So we want to go beyond niceties, okay? We also want to be careful, and this isn't in the document here, but I'm going to mention it. We also want to be careful that when we are providing feedback on writing, it's not our job necessarily to provide our emotional response to it, or to talk about how we relate to it. So if somebody wrote in their personal statement about traveling the world, and I respond, oh, that's so cool. I've always wanted to travel the world. Thank you for sharing. That helps us connect together like as people. But again, it doesn't meet the goal of providing feedback on the writing, which is the goal when we do any type of peer review, pair and share, trading grade, writer's triad, whatever we want to call it. It's all about giving and getting feedback. Okay, so we want to go beyond those emotional, I agree, I like this type of responses. And one way to do so, which students often kind of maybe don't think about, is to ask questions. That can be a great way to provide feedback on a paper. So the probably most important thing, that you can keep in mind when providing feedback to your classmate is that it is not your job to fix the paper as the reviewer. That is not your job. Instead, your job is to help your classmate understand how your writing affected them. Does that make sense? So whenever I'm asking you to provide feedback, I am not asking you to provide feedback as an expert, the same way that I am providing you feedback. Instead, I am asking you to provide feedback as a reader, which you are all very well qualified to do, okay? And some of the ways that we might provide feedback as a reader is to ask questions. So you might ask questions about the claims that the writer makes in the particular assignment. You might ask questions about their evidence or question the organization that they have created in their essay. You might have questions about sentence structure, word choice. You may have questions about content, right? Maybe they left something sort of incomplete and you need more information. You could ask questions about that as well. Another excellent technique for providing feedback is to look for patterns in the writing. So again, it's not your job to be an editor. It is not your job to go through your partner's essay and mark every single grammar error that they make or make suggestions for improvement. Instead, what's often more helpful is to look for patterns of errors. So if you notice that your partner tends to create a lot of sentence fragments, mention to them that general issue. I noticed that you have a lot of sentence fragments in your essay, and then maybe just mark one or two of them. But when we can reveal patterns to each other of errors or of strengths, that can be really useful feedback for our partners. We also want to be aware of taking over. Again, sometimes I will see feedback that goes the opposite direction from, oh, that was really nice. And instead we're saying, well, this is what your thesis should say. And this is the type of evidence that you should include. And this is how you should reword your conclusion. That's not your job, right? Their writing is their responsibility. So we should never try to overtake, their tone, their language, their choices, whatever it might be. It's a great idea when providing feedback to organize your comments. We usually ask you to emphasize the significant writing issues before we get down to like the nitty-gritty sentence level stuff, because it doesn't matter if you have a fantastic sentence if you have no thesis statement, right? Does that make sense? So think about presenting your feedback in a way that will make sense to your partner. Of course, we want to use time effectively. I usually think about an hour for a peer review session is a general, good time frame to think of. If you're going much beyond that, you're probably getting a little bit into things that are not necessarily your responsibility. And it may be a little shorter than that, of course, just depending on the assignment. Certainly, my next piece of advice is to be careful of your language choices. So I always have to tell the story about my first year here at IVCC. The very first peer review session I ever ran, I had a student tell another student, they literally said, "You must be really stupid," which you can imagine was quite horrifying for me as a teacher to hear. But I do blame myself a little bit for that, because I didn't take the time before that very first peer review session that I ran to talk about considering your language choices. So certainly there would have been a way for that student to convey to the writer that there were a lot of spelling errors in their paper without literally calling them stupid, right? Maybe they could have said, maybe you should try to run the spell checker, or I noticed several spelling errors, something like that. So do be careful to present your critiques in a way that is constructive and not insulting, right, to the writer. Don't be afraid to make the organization of your feedback explicit. So if you want to use bullet points or transitional words and phrases or a numbered list to present feedback to your partner, that is fantastic. And I think a lot of peer reviewers find that more manageable if you sort of present it as bullet points instead of as a narrative. So that could be another option for some of you as well. Something that is so important that I used to tell my tutors in the Writing Center all the time was to understand too that you probably cannot, at least in some essays, help the writer fix every single issue. We're limited. We only have a certain amount of time. And again, it's not necessarily our responsibility to overhaul your partner's entire paper. So if you ever receive a draft and you're thinking, boy, there's a lot going on that this student needs to fix, then it becomes essential to prioritize your comments. So in that scenario, I would suggest selecting the 2 or 3 most important elements of the paper that you wanted to give feedback on and providing the feedback in that way. You don't have to take care of the whole shebang at once. Just if you can suggest 2 or 3 improvements for the writer, that can make a really big impact on their product. Another fantastic idea for students who are not quite sure on how to give specific feedback, like let's say you're reading a student's paper and you're thinking to yourself, I think there's stuff going on with their grammar. I don't know if what I'm looking at is like technically a comma splice, or is it a run-on sentence? Is there like one of those dangling modifiers happening? Maybe we don't know, right? But what we might do in that scenario is refer the writer to other resources. So you might say something like, I'm a little concerned about the grammar in your paper. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I want to suggest for you to visit the Writing Center because I think that they could provide you good feedback. Or you might say, you might find running the spell checker to be helpful with your spelling, things like that. So sometimes you're not the person to provide the feedback, but you might be able to point the person in the direction where they can find that expert feedback, which can be really helpful. And then finally, keep in mind, you're just one reader. So, writing is not so much of a science. It's a little bit more of an art, I would say. So the way one reader perceives a sentence or a paragraph can be quite different from the way another reader might perceive that same sentence or that same paragraph. So it doesn't hurt to emphasize to your reader, in my opinion, as one reader, from my perspective, these ideas, just reminding the reader that, again, this is how your writing impacted me as a reader. But at the end of the day, it's up to the writer whether to accept or reject that advice. So again, if you take away nothing else from the peer review discussion guidelines here, I would say the most important thing is just to think about responding as a reader, not as an expert. And I think that will help most students feel more comfortable in providing that feedback. Now, one last thing that I want to mention before I sign off is sometimes you receive a paper, and this happens quite frequently, where you receive a paper and it's just so darn good that you really are struggling to find anything to critique in this writer's piece, okay? The good news is you can still provide effective feedback to that writer, because feedback and peer review processes, writing workshops, are not only about pointing out flaws. They are not only about finding errors and weaknesses. They are also about showing the reader what they are doing well. They are also about showing the writer what they are doing well, and showing the writer what you perceive to be their areas of strength. Because believe it or not, many, I would say most writers who come through my classroom are very hard on themselves and very hard on their own writing. And they may not even know or recognize or be able to articulate to themselves what the strengths of their writing are. Okay. So in the end, whether you're providing feedback on strengths or feedback on weaknesses, the best thing that you can keep in mind is to be specific, right? Be specific. So we wouldn't want to just say, oh, your writing's beautiful. Great job. What part of my writing was beautiful? Was it my title? Was it my sentence structure? Was it the imagery that I used? Instead, if I said to that writer, you have an ability to craft long and grammatically correct sentences that I find impressive. I was always able to clearly follow your ideas. And I especially thought your second paragraph did a beautiful job, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So the more specific you can be with that feedback, the better. Yeah, specificity is good when it comes to writing feedback. So I hope that helps get you a little more comfortable giving feedback to each other. Of course, if you have any questions at all, let me know and I'll be happy to help. Otherwise, happy writing.